Good morning, everybody. My name is Randy Bell. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Thank you all for braving the weather this morning and joining us. I think we'll call it a monsoon since we have a bit of an India focus coming up. I'm pleased to welcome you to the first day of the 13th meeting of the IEA's Gas and Oil Technology Collaboration Program. With an official mandate from the IEA, the Gas and Oil Technology Collaboration Program combines the efforts of government, academia, and industry to explore the role of the oil and gas industry in meeting the twin challenges of growing energy demand and the urgent need to decarbonize the energy system to avoid the potential catastrophic impacts of anthropogenic climate change. This question is a pressing priority for us here at the Atlantic Council, and we'll be releasing a report at our Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi this January on various proactive roles the oil and gas industry can play in the energy transition. It's encouraging that the IEA has identified this as a priority, as well as with the establishment of the GOTCP. We are proud to host its executive committee, led by Jostine Dahl Carlson, for the next 2 days, for what I'm sure will be a rewarding series of conversations. So we hope we'll be here this morning, so please stick around. You probably won't want to leave because of the rain, but there'll be some lunch, so stick around. Then please do come back again tomorrow morning for an additional conversation. A brief administrative note, I'd like to remind you this is all on the record. It's public. You can follow with us on Twitter using the hashtag AC Energy. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jostine to kick things off.
Thank you, Randy, and welcome everyone. We're thrilled to be here in DC. Actually, it's the second time we're here. We're a technology program that are mandated, as Randy said, to build on the IEA convening power in forging an international dialogue. So the capitals are a key target group for us, and indeed DC is not an exception there. What I wanted to do is just briefly flesh out a little bit more on what GOT is, what are our ambitions, and the context for our activities. As I mentioned, we're part of the International Energy Agency. We believe that we have a unique forum in the sense that it's a public-private enterprise. So it really mandates to bring all the public and private stakeholders around the table to discuss issues of common interest. And you also will see here our value proposition, which is exploring the role of oil and gas technology in the energy transition. And this is not coming as a coincidence, but as we are engaged is looking at how the energy future evolves and how it evolves in an integrated fashion. So it's not a black and white situation where you have silo-based developments in fuels. It's actually getting more and more interlinked, which we will come back to. And hopefully the flood alerts will keep us going as well, but we will. I think we're more interested in our context. So this is the meetings we've had since we started in 2013. As I mentioned, we're pursuing global venues, and you can see a selection of executive committee meetings and location around in the world, and we're here very, very pleased to work with the excellent team of Randy Bell and Reed and Gray. That's actually been doing a wonderful job putting this together, and we're here to really enjoy discussions ahead. Our activities are divided into work streams, and here you see the 6 of them. By focus, the program covers the entire chain from upstream oil and gas via exploration, production, and down to also midstream, downstream. We added a few new work streams on the top left, the energy choice activity. We're working with leading academia to examine the long-term energy choices of nations. And this will be a program that we plan to kick off this year and will be going at least towards 2021 to develop an analytical framework to examine the optionality, energy optionality. I'll come back to that. The hydrocarbon Nexus work stream, you're welcome to join us for tomorrow's workshop. It's our fourth event, and it is we were approached by National Renewable Energy Technology Laboratory in Golden, Colorado for this, and we're quite excited about this activity. And then you have the other work streams covering the value chain, as you see below. On the energy choice, we're engaged in looking at the drivers of tomorrow's energy economy. And of course, here you see there are several fundamental drivers. Of course, we hear a lot about the sustainability aspect. And in addition, there are a number of countries that have key objective to give more, provide more energy to their citizens. So energy access and also affordability issues are key. So we like to see the future of energy in this totality. And clearly the UN Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement then are backdrops to this. And we are looking then, as I mentioned, on choice cases to be examined, working with leading academia to model and fact-find the key optionality elements. And we're doing that in an integrated, holistic fashion, with also an energy mix life cycle analysis component integrated. Just a few things. I think IEA projects a lot and produces a lot of valuable information. This is just a snapshot of the global energy future towards 2040. And as you can see, there are key trends in terms of where are the growing nations in terms of energy consumption. You see, India is surpassing China in terms of energy demand towards 2040. Will be interesting to expand a little bit on this context during this morning. We're looking to have very key prominent people with us here to do that. Of course, this country, last time I was here, there was a lot about importing LNG, but now it's upside down. It's a lot about exporting LNG. And I think that's probably one of the biggest development in the energy sector the past 10 to 20 years is the shifting nature of the global role of US. So all ways to look at the energy future easily become obsolete unless you sort of make sure you're updated into what both technology and the energy economy provides of developments. I just also brought this. I think it's important to keep in mind that in fact, according to the UN, Africa will be the driver in terms of population growth in the greater part of this century. And for us, we think that is a key reminder. And clearly in the energy choice, Africa is still the region with a major challenge in terms of energy access. And this is, I think, also a huge issue for us in the international energy community to understand how we can develop a balanced energy future for all. Then I think a part of that, of course, is how does energy systems evolve, and a lot is about integration of renewables. And as IEA sees that it goes in 4 stages. If you track where renewables stand in different countries around the world, there are some where integration of renewables is not very much an issue yet. There are some countries where they're building on existing infrastructure to load on more solar and wind. And there are countries where there is on the policy agenda flexibility mechanism to make sure that you have a broader inroad of renewables, and some very pacing ones. So I think this goes back to my introductory remark that of black and white, there's no one size fits all. But you could probably think, or be leading to think so when you listen to a lot of debates. I think it's locally, it's regionally dependent, and it's about how the different various national energy mixes will evolve. So I think that is a part of, I think, the backdrop I would suggest we bring with us in our deliberations throughout today and tomorrow. I just brought a summary slide of the meeting block activity. We will hear, very pleased that we have also Department of Energy with us here. We will talk about national optionality, next generation energy and hydrocarbon technologies tomorrow, and hydrocarbon renewable Nexus day 2. These are you have this in your program, so I won't dwell much on that. But I think one place where we do see a lot of integration currently and a lot of development is within the offshore marine context of what we call the offshore energy nexus. This is where there is a lot of things happening currently, both in terms of integrating green electricity into installations offshore for electrification, hydrogen related to different industrial complexes and related to CCS, and there are also, if you blend in ammonia aspects, there are a lot of opportunities. And we think it's interesting because IEA just came out with a report on the future of hydrogen to G20 in June. We are very pleased that the hydrogen agreement here will present findings from that tomorrow. We also, as a TCP, were part of peer reviewing this report. It's on our webpage. You can look at it at www.gotcp.net under news. I just wanted to say that also as an example, I think when we talk about large-scale investments and energy future, it's all about scale in our view. For instance, this has been given as a presentation in some of our events, but I think it's a very good example showing the amount of flexibility you get from state-of-the-art battery today. It's a question of seconds, and if you stack a lot of them, thousands of them, you get 2.5 days, and it's nothing compared to a large-scale facility, hydrogen facility. So I think this is also something we need to keep in mind, and we like to see, for instance, talking about hydrogen in that perspective, there's a giant flexibility challenge. Of course, in many circumstances, people like to look at the downsides of hydrogen and the risks, such as safety or footprint. But I think it's time now to look more on the opportunities. So that is what I was going to say. I thank you for your attendance, and I also have now the undisputed pleasure to introduce Das Sean Bennett, who's been very Very pleased that you have the opportunity to talk to us here and represent the Department of Energy. And of course, we all, as I alluded to, we're interested to hear from the horse's mouth about a little bit what's the perspectives coming out of DC. So, floor is yours.
Oh, good morning, and I am Sean Bennett, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Oil and Gas, and ironically, I don't have a car in DC, so I rely on metro and walking, which usually works out in my favor, but did not today. So, now we're living in a really exciting and promising time for U.S. fossil energy development, and a lot has to do with the fact that we have a president who recognizes the reality and embraces the fact that we have vast domestic resources here in the United States, and especially in oil and natural gas, and that we need to develop them, produce them, and export them. So we're seeing what happens when we have that potential unleashed, and nowhere is that more obvious than in our oil and gas sector. So the U.S. now is the largest producer of both oil and natural gas, and in 2017 we became a net exporter of natural gas for the first time since 1957. So think about that. We went through many times of scarcity. We were building import terminals in 2003. I think by 2005 we had over 50 import applications. Now we're actually going to be a leading exporter here soon, and that's just a phenomenal turnaround thanks to the shale revolution. And so in the meantime, we're seeing phenomenal expansion year over year in the production of our oil and natural gas. And looking at oil, we saw a record high of production of 11 million barrels a day last year. And going forward, the EIA forecast the U.S. crude production will average about 12.4 million barrels a day and 13.2 next year. So crude oil exports have increased about 400% since President Trump took office, and those exports represent nearly a quarter of our daily domestic production. And as you actually get water on yourself, your paper does not separate as easy. But last year we exported about 2 million barrels a day, nearly double the 1.2 million barrels a day and the rate of in 2017. So at the same time, U.S. natural gas production grew by 12 billion cubic feet per day last year, an 11% increase since 2017. And that is the largest annual increase in production on record in the second consecutive year that we reached a record high. So by innovating instead of over-regulating and by encouraging rather than discouraging production, we're ensuring our energy security, growing our economy, and creating jobs and strengthening our national security. Now we're also expanding global markets for our American energy resources, which is good for the industry, our partners around the world, and can make America energy dominant in the global market. And President Trump has said that U.S. energy exports provide true energy security to our friends, partners, and allies across the globe. And nowhere is that more evident than in the impact the U.S. LNG is having on the global market, where last year LNG trade grew by 8% over 2017, hitting just over 41 BCF a day, and where the U.S. LNG grew by 53% to 3 billion cubic feet per day. So the world's LNG market is expanding, and so are American exports. And we have the resources and export infrastructures that promise to make the U.S. a leading global natural gas supplier. And this administration is committed to making it easier for that to happen. And as you know, my office has the regulatory authority over natural gas exports within the Department of Energy. And to date, we've authorized over 22 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas, primarily spread across 13 large-scale export projects in Louisiana, Texas, Maryland, Georgia, and the Gulf of Mexico. Now, these projects have authorizations to export anywhere in the world not prohibited by U.S. law or policy. And so the amount that we have approved also includes 2 planned LNG projects in Canada, 2 in Mexico that plan to re-export U.S. natural gas as LNG, and around 13 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas export capacity in various stages of operation and construction across 7 large-scale LNG exports in the United States. So by the end of next year, U.S. LNG export capacity expected to grow by 150% over 2018, with up to 11 BCF a day, billion cubic feet a day of export capacity is expected to be online. And American LNG exports are having a global reach, and cargoes from the U.S. have reached 5 continents and have landed in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, South America, North America, and the Caribbean. And in total, U.S. LNG exports have landed in 35 destinations across the world. And President Trump has taken important steps to expand our energy exports. And a couple months ago, he issued 2 sweeping executive orders aimed at removing barriers to energy infrastructure development and to allow LNG to be transported by rail. And you'll be particularly interested to know that the President has also ordered a report on the impacts and limitations on the export of natural gas and energy resources from the U.S. West Coast. Now, these executive orders are a major step forward to removing regulatory red tape, streamlining and modernizing regulatory process, and promoting an even more efficient energy market. And they will help the certainty of the private sector, help provide the certainty the private sector needs to invest in critical infrastructure projects. So the shale revolution has had enormous benefits in terms of U.S. energy security and impacts on the global markets. And this administration is committed to expanding those benefits and the potential of our oil and gas resources. But that potential also highlights the importance of overcoming some challenges in the field, both upstream development of the unconventional resources and in midstream in terms of infrastructure efficiency. While smart policies and regulations can go a long way to spur resource development and delivery, a lot of challenges that we face require a technology solution. Our job at DOE and the Office of Fossil Energy in particular is to lead and support the research and development to help overcome those challenges and ensure that we can realize the full potential of our vast oil and gas resources. So I'd like to spend a few minutes to kind of highlight some of the priorities and how they can help us do that. Now, our focus is on early stage R&D. That industry wouldn't fund solely on their own, but could be of significant value in the unconventional and conventional development space. And we're not working alone. We're partnering with industry, academia on most of this research, and our national labs are a very important part of our research portfolio. And this portfolio includes both upstream and midstream R&D. And I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight what we're doing in those areas. So let's first take a look at production and development, where one of the biggest hurdles has to do with the rapid decline curve in shale oil and gas production after initial production. So for example, a well may yield 1,000 barrels of oil per day in the first year of production, but by the second year, it drops to 400 and continues to decline over time. Now, there will become a point, if oil and gas prices are too low to justify leaving the well in production, an operator may prematurely plug and abandon that well, relieving valuable resources in the ground. Now, right now, for instance, we're only getting about 10% of the resource out of the ground in unconventional oil reservoirs. Now, if we could figure out a way to increase that to 20% or more, that would be a huge win, and it would be really another shale oil revolution with having to drill more wells consecutively. So new applications of machine learning and data analytics may be able to process and interpret complex data streams in the real time to enhance decision making and increase production of our unconventional resources. Now, every basin formation is geologically different, so we are turning to a more targeted basin-specific approach to technology development at the Department of Energy, where we'll be able to look at all kinds of subsurface data, a massive amount of data, to better understand the specific basins and to increase unconventional oil and gas production. Now, the development and integration of these big data and machine learning tools, coupled with high-performance computing, have the potential to usher a paradigm shift from energy production and development to systems operation. But it can only be impactful to the degree that we have sufficient data, big data. So we want to work with industry, we want to work with academia and our national labs to secure that data and be able to analyze it and see if we can make a very large change in this arena. So again, we welcome everyone's input and thoughts in these areas as well as other areas. So now I'd also like to talk a couple minutes about what we're doing in enhanced oil recovery. Now, the opportunity for enhanced oil recovery, EOR, in the United States is the future is significant, including the development of new fields and building carbon capture facilities and thousands of miles of additional pipeline necessary to connect CO2 sources with promising oil fields. Now, today, over 70 million tons of CO2 is used for enhanced oil recovery, with approximately 15 million tons coming from sources such as gas processing plants, ethanol facilities, refineries, and coal-fired power plants. Now, DOE estimates that future EOR in the United States could recover 137 billion barrels from conventional oil fields and 100 billion barrels from unconventional tight oil fields, and much more from residual oil zones and offshore oil fields. Now, we are just beginning our assessment of unconventional and offshore opportunities in the EOR space, and we recently made available $15 million in funding for projects to improve and enhance oil recovery in offshore wells, which will help us expand the potential for developing our vast resources. But to fully realize these EOR opportunities and the demand for CO2, the United States would need to build dozens of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS plants, to capture 250 million tons of CO2 per year, or the equivalent to the emissions of 40 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants. Now, CCUS is usually associated with coal, but carbon utilization aspect of CCUS, and specifically using captured CO2 for enhanced resource recovery, has a great deal of potential for the oil and gas industry. In fact, the National Petroleum Council is working on a study requested by Secretary Perry to define the potential pathways for integrating CCUS at a scale into the energy industrial marketplace, especially the petroleum industry. Now this study is exploring R&D and regulatory and policy options that can catalyze CCUS deployment. And by the way, we're seeing a global convergence towards CCUS in the coal and oil and gas industry. The Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, a multinational oil and gas industry group, has been making the business case for CCUS. They currently have 4 investments in CCUS, and they are looking to invest in additional projects. This work on CCUS in the oil and gas industry is extremely encouraging, and I think it could catalyze a broader development and deployment of these technologies, and ultimately help expand our EOR capabilities. So those are some of the things that we're doing on the production and development side, but I also want to highlight what we're doing to address the challenges of produced water, which has always been a byproduct of oil and gas production. Now, as you know, with the dramatic increase in production, the volume of water produced has also increased. And the more water is being produced, then it can be used in the process of drilling, completing, and stimulating oil and gas wells. Now, right now, the cost of disposal means that companies are reusing as much as they can in field and disposing the rest. Now, treatment of the water costs more than disposal. And coupled with the cost of moving the treated water from supply location to new location, there's little incentive to treat the water and convert it from a waste to a resource. So we've got a number of projects to address the water challenges, and they run the gamut from basic science and risk assessment to water treatment technology development, and to enhanced water disposal options and produced water management and focused other areas. Now, the effort supports the Water Security Grand Challenge, which the White House initiated and DOE is leading. Now, the goal of the Grand Challenge is to advance transformational technology and innovation to meet global need for safe, secure, and affordable water. And we recently announced up to $5 million in federal funding to projects to accelerate the development and commercialization of treatment technologies that reduce wastewater and increase freshwater supplies. Now, this funding opportunity advances the Grand Challenge's goal. So that's an overview of what the department is doing on oil and gas. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to will require cutting-edge, early-stage R&D, the kind of research and development that plays on the strengths of universities and our national labs, and the expertise and the resources of industry. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought. And the government can't and should not work in a vacuum. And this administration recognizes that we need input from industry, stakeholders, and academia. We truly value those partnerships, and perhaps that has not always been the case in the past, but I can assure you that's the case with this administration. It's really an all hands on deck to get these technologies in place and to apply them to real-world challenges of resource production and development. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent. We'll now turn to the first panel on the system energy choices and responses in the case of India. So I'd like to call on the panelists to take a seat on the stage here. It's Economic Council of India, Nikhil Awad, Lauren Dickman, Samuel Noem. Well, excellent, and welcome to our first session. What we like to start with is just to ask for some introductory remarks, and then after that we will have a discussion where we can expand a little bit on the topics of the day. So, Councillor, could I ask you, given the case of India, what comes to mind first and foremost from the government of India? Could you give us, spend 3 to 5 minutes on your sort of initial thoughts?
Good morning, everyone. The new government took oath on the 30th of May, and then the 4th of July we had the economic survey, the first economic survey from the new government, and the 5th of July, that is this Friday, we had the first full budget from the new government. And if you look at it, currently we are a $2.7 trillion economy. The finance minister stated at the end of this year would be around $3 trillion economy, and with the aspiration and a target of becoming a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. We require a growth rate of around 8% to achieve that. This is possible. Number of projections, if you look at in the recent past, the 7.5, 7.6% of growth has been indicated by many specialists in the sector. But the important aspect is that it is clearly stated in the economic survey, to achieve this kind of a growth, energy is the key factor which is required in a huge quantity, even more than what is projected in the IEA analysis. The economic survey says that to achieve a $5,000 per capita income, our per capita energy consumption needs to increase 2.5 times from the present level. And to have a HDI index of 0.8, our energy consumption needs to grow 4 times from where we stand today. And achieving these objectives, we are very aware of our Sustainable Development Goals and our COP21 commitments. So this put together, how we can navigate that path, that's why the government has put forward certain very ambitious projects. The FAME, which has the fast adoption and manufacturing of EVs in India. So budget has provided for $1.5 billion of support in next 3 years, which will be spent. So from this front, going to the remote corners of the country, to the villages where 20 million new households are expected to be built for the poor in next 3 years. This time the government has made a provision that these houses will be equipped with the electricity and the LPG connection as well. So the cooking gas will be provided and electricity will be provided. So kind of demand growth you can see to achieve this objective, that's across the sectors, and with fully aware about the responsibility about the climate change and then the commitment of the sustainable development. So I think I should stop here for the opening remarks. Thank you
very much. Excellent. Let me turn to the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Lauren, you see this, you follow up with India as a country, but you represent commercial interest. Yes, exactly. And if you were to fill in on what the Councillor said, from your perspective, what would be your initial remarks?
I think it's it's exciting times when you talk about India and energy. It's emerged as one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It's projected to account for about 1/4 of global energy growth over the next 20 years. Everything Neil Council just said, they're focusing on growing out their energy infrastructure from oil and gas, civil nuclear, looking at renewables, new and innovative technologies like energy storage, smart grids, also looking at energy efficiency. So all provide huge opportunities for industry to not only invest, but also to engage on issues like regulatory best practices and things going forward. I think there's also a huge focus on growing the share of gas in the economy, and therefore like the U.S.-India Strategic Energy Partnership, led by DOE, the Gas Task Force. It's key to the bilateral relationship as well. Secretary Pompeo was just in India and reaffirmed this and highlighted, the growing trade in oil and gas. So I think looking at the commercial side of it, there's tremendous opportunities.
Interesting. And if we move from the commercial sector to the multinational, your group, Sami, really looks at India and looked at also other countries. But to contrast the more India-specific part and just expand a little bit on the envelope to what's your views in front of your group in SPE? Maybe you could shed some light on that.
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Before I start, I would like just to congratulate the Department of Energy for a very successful oil and gas strategy. I'm very, very impressed with the performance of the U.S. Oil and gas industry. So thanks to the OD. In the last probably 10 years ago, we were talking and people were talking about peak oil issue, or what's called peak oil theory, and we were trying to explain to people back then that with technology you can do a lot of things. You can really convert things to more opportunity. You can increase recovery. You can basically make whatever today not producible. And that's exactly what the U.S. oil and gas industry have achieved in the last 10 years. Very remarkable performance. Thank you very much. I represent the Society of Petroleum Engineers. This is the largest professional society supporting the global oil and gas upstream side of the business. We're more in collecting, disseminating, advancing, and exchanging practices in relation to the technology supporting the upstream side of oil and gas. So when it comes to shale boom, most of the technologies that were developed, were developed through our events, conferences, workshops, and technology seminars. The way that we see it from the SPE perspective, we believe that oil and gas will continue with us for a very long time. And I think the way that we should challenge ourselves is how to make oil and gas cleaner. And I think DOD strategy addresses this in the heart. And I was very happy to hear about the future plans coming from the United States of America, as well as in the other countries as well. So our definition of energy transition is more into cleaner and more efficient oil and gas, supported by renewables. So we still talk about renewables, especially in the power generation. We see renewable is going to play a major factor in the power generation. In the oil side, we see it more into what is called today crude to chemicals. It's something coming in the future where basically non-combusted uses of oil will be developed through, again, technology, because technology is the game changer, and it's our advantage in SPE, basically. So we see more natural gas, evolving natural gas industry, as a matter of fact, and I think the export of LNG and natural gas in the U.S. is a good indication. How would that play a major factor in the global energy mix, as well as addressing the CO2 emission as well, because again, natural gas is being looked as a green source of energy. So we see more natural gas, more renewables in the power generation, more non-combusted use of oil that would play a major factor also into reducing the CO2 emission, and of course investing more and advancing the technology of what is called today oil and gas decarbonization domain. It's something that is very rich. It needs a lot of attention. Our intention in SPE is to focus more on that domain, come up with events, technology workstations and seminars, conferences, to talk more about it and advance the technology of the decarbonization aspects of oil and gas.
Excellent. Well, that was an impressive suite, and I think it is. There are the toolbox is broad, and so are the challenges. Well, I'd like to kind of build on your revisit of the U.S. success, and of course, as we see, this is have international implications. Now, I was curious, Councillor, in terms of your description of the Indian challenges and your daunting ambitions to provide more wealth to your citizens by a factor of 2 to 5 and they translate that into the energy consumption. How do you see India playing on the international market to actually help leverage attaining these goals? Do you have any strategies, or are there any linkages to your policies in your new administration? I wonder if you could just expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. Look at the sources available and the challenges. Obviously, the biggest challenge for us is the dependency on particularly the oil and gas. We import more than 80% of our requirement in the crude, and in the gas also it is 50. The natural gas is only 6.5% in our energy mix, and we want to double it and rather to take it to 15% in a short term, and then to go higher to the global standards. Obviously, in both the cases, in the crude as well as the gas, there are challenges. The last year, our import budget for the crude was around $112 billion, and it is one of the highest items of our import bill. The other good side of it is that as having a huge refining capacity, it also figures, the petroleum products also figures one of the highest items on our export side. So that's a side to it. We have the collaboration across the globe to, so the one thing which you have to do is how we can diversify. So more we diversify, that gives us the security. So renewable is certainly one area where we are going big. We had a target of 175 gigawatt to be achieved by 2022, and the Prime Minister announced it 5 years ago, and then today we stand at 78 gigawatt achieved out of that. We are the 4th largest producer in the wind, 5th largest in the solar, and 5th largest renewables put together. We already started discussing what beyond 2022. And when the Secretary Renewable was here in Feb, we were discussing about the 500 gigawatt in renewable by 2030. The action plan may emerge in the course of time, but we're looking at around 40 gigawatt every year from 2022 to 2030. 30 solar and 10 wind every year, and adding it for next 8 years will give us around 320, and putting this 175 will be close to 500. So that's one big thing. But as we are aware that we can't live without the oil and gas, at least in near future. So in the oil, we have the technology partnerships. We are looking for the investments, overseas investments in India. We have the MOUs with the NETL and REL and the other bodies. So certainly we are looking to bring the investment into exploration into India so that we get more security in the oil and gas field.
That's an interesting. Would that be something from SPE's point of view if a big country like India puts EUR as a target? That fits straight into your taxonomy, right?
I think it fits perfectly there, and I think India again is you mentioned in your presentation Africa, and I would like to come back to Africa later on if we have the time, but India is a good example of where you can do a significant impact when it comes to the climate challenge, by investing more in renewables for power generation, and also most importantly possibly getting more gas into India. There are several gas resources around India. Geographically, you look at it, a lot of gas around that area that can be really harvested and sent to India, to help meeting the energy demand, the growing demand, but as well addressing the climate challenge, which is really huge challenge, I would say, to India.
So, Lauren, talking about gas in the future, is that a stepstone for U.S. Industry now? Given that you have more to export, you might have markets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen an increase in gas exports to India. India is certainly interested in working with us for more. There's so many different forums and conversations to explore this issue, but it's also looking at the services side, technology side. It's definitely an area for growth.
Yeah. Well, excellent. And I know also that you've been working on IEA issues in your previous career in the Department of Energy, and I was curious if we now move from sort of the international interaction on the India context. IEA is a multinational organization. In your perspective, how would you think IEA could contribute in this field?
I think they contribute a lot already. I mean, IEA has been a great partner with India, but certainly on the technology and best practices side, I think that's a huge area.
Yes, and I'd like to challenge you a little bit also, Councillor, coming from the technology arm of IEA, and you're saying that there is some challenges in actually increasing the energy security, for instance, for oil in India, and by way, for instance, your produce more nationally on the EOR side. Is that on the agenda in Delhi currently also explicitly to enhance your own capabilities in the EOR field? You mentioned CCSU.
Yes, both. Like 2017, we launched the new hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy, which is called HELP, and in the presence of the CEO of the IEA at the CERAWeek in Houston. And under HELP, we have 90 plus blocks which were already discovered, small fields or the new fields, which we have auctioned. They have good response. But certainly that's not enough, and we require to do much more on that front. So the government is very keen to accept the suggestions across the globe for the new technology as well as for the change in the policy if that is required. And we are continuously in discussion with the global players that what will make India a more attractive destination for the oil and gas exploration. On the CCUS, if you're following the last week only, the ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation of India, which is the biggest exploration public sector company, and Indian Oil Corporation Limited, which is our biggest refinery in the country, they have signed an MOU. So the CO2 from the refinery is going to be used for the exploration by ONGC in the Gandhar field in India. And we certainly are very optimistic about the CCUS, and we hope that this will also help us for the enhanced oil recovery, and certainly on the climate change front also it will help us to optimally utilize of carbon. So we are working on that.
Fantastic. Does SPE have any particular activities within CCSU?
Well, I mean, the whole CSU was invented by the upstream side of the business, and it goes back, as a matter of fact, maybe 40 years ago or more. We have developed technology basically through our technical events, to quantify the enhanced oil recovery, through CO2 injection, and we have also developed a document that talks about the concept of CO2 storage as well. It's a document available on the website. Anybody can access it. So basically, it's something that I think we would like to invest more in through our events, to promote more, to advance more. Our One Petro database, it's the largest database with respect to the upstream technical knowledge. It contains all of the technical papers since the inceptions of SPE almost 130 years ago, when it was under AMI, American Meteorological Institute of Engineers. And it has a lot of rich knowledge about the carbon capture and sequestration. And it's something that I think we need to focus more on. It's something that I wish that for example, SPE and IEA can collaborate in this aspect, because it hits two birds with one stone. You can increase the recovery, but also you can address significantly the climate challenge. And I think I agree with many people who believe, including, by the way, Dr. Birol, the IEA director, who believe that the carbon capture and sequestration is going to be a major player in the climate, in addressing the climate challenge. It's something that also we believe in, and our strategy is really to increase the events, the technical events and technology workshops that talks about carbon capture and sequestration.
So when you apparently, as you correctly allude to, we're building on a 40 years, maybe old, longer heritage in this respect. When we look at the CCS part on the large scale, it's still the jury is still out to actually have a large-scale project with post-combustion that puts on stream a full-fledged values chain from source to sink. So lead times are long, although the competence is there. But are you optimistic or pessimistic, given that we are
I am very
losing?
optimistic.
Very good.
Again, I always quote the U.S. oil and gas performance. It's very optimistic. Going back to the oil peak theory 10 years ago, people were so optimistic, and we were very optimistic because we knew that the technology can solve all kind of problems. Yeah. Any problem can be solved with technology. All it takes is just more focus and more investment, and I think that's what it takes to really makes the carbon capture and sequestration grow significantly. It just takes more focus, and I think that's something that we would like to put together with our partners, and also investment, to advance the technology to basically make projects more economically visible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I'd like to shift a little bit perspective now. We've been touching upon a number of contexts, but going back to the energy access and in the case of India, Councillor, there's something called the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I was curious, how does that pan out in relation to India? Because as you referred to, there are clear ambitions nationally for your citizens, but have you translated that into pledges for the development goals?
If you look at the SDGs, out of 17, the two which categorically related to energy, that is, one is affordable and clean energy, and the second was the climate action. So on both these fronts, I think India is doing reasonably good. Like our action plan for the renewable goes very well with those objectives. The statement of the finance minister in presenting budget on Friday, when she is talking about we want a green Mother Earth and blue skies with pollution-free India. That's the vision with which the government is presenting another budget. And if you look at some of the initiatives which have been taken, like look at the scheme like Ujjwala, where the 50 million households have been given a cooking gas. India was, because of indoor house pollution, if you look at all the WHO and the international studies, there was a huge impact on women and children because of the cooking fuel, the biomass, which is the way it used to be used. But Ujjwala has made a huge difference to their lives. Look at the way the LED distribution program has worked in India. So far, we have distributed 350 million LEDs, and the net saving is $2.6 billion per annum. That's the saving we have achieved. So these are the achievements where we are talking about. And so now the government has also proposed that on the similar pattern, the way the Energy Efficiencies and Services Limited has done the LED distribution program, and it has a huge success. On the similar line, we are planning now to have the solar stores and the battery chargers. So if you have that kind of a reach across the country, it is going to help us in a big way. While talking about one nation, one grid, we have reached every village and every hamlet, and where the population, which is too thin, through solar and the scheme of having a battery backup unit with a solar generation to meet the minimum requirements of the people. That's again a huge achievement. Just look at the initiatives and when they are evaluated and presented in this budget. So far, we have saved 108 million tons of CO2, and in financial terms, it's a $7 billion worth saving. So we are very much committed to our objective of the sustainable goals development and as well as the Paris climate commitments. So every time we speak and talk about how to achieve this, the growth, we are very well aware that we always think that while doing this, are we going to, though we are one of the lowest in the per capita CO2 production in the world, but still we are very much aware of our responsibility and our commitment, and every phase of planning, we consciously take a decision, like in this FAME case also, which I said that the fast adoption and manufacturing of EVs, we are trying to have a 2,700 charging station across the country in a 3x3 kilometer grid, one charging station, and on highways every 25 kilometers on both sides of the road we need to have a charging station. So that is the plan, and funds have already been allotted for that to deal with the urban areas. Under this fund we plan to have 1 million two-wheelers, around 500,000 three-wheelers, the auto, which is a public transport mode, and around 7,000 public transport buses to be go EV in next 3 years period. So if you look at all the steps which we are taking and the kind of savings we are making, I think we are very much committed to the SDG goals.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say, I know our executive director, Fatih Birol, he always mentions India as a lighthouse for the international community, and it's fascinating to see the progress. I was just curious, you mentioned sort of transport sector activities, but and the one grid ambitions. But what about the off-grid? Obviously, there must be huge challenges on the rural area side. What is the sort of panorama there? Are you also advancing in standalone systems for energy production supply, or how is that progressing in?
Yeah, we're looking at the microgrids, and then where even the microgrids are not possible in rural areas, to the household solutions, like you have a solar panels, battery backup, and then a household will be provided with the 5 LED lamps, and then a electric fan, and then a DC switch. So that is the minimum that every household in rural areas or isolated areas should also get. So that's the plan, and for that the funds are available and the scheme is in place. So I believe by 2022 we are also talking about the cooking gas requirements, so the LPG. So every household in the country by 2022 should have that facility available. So it is going to take like resources and then the commitment, which I think is shown by this government, and the vision is quite clear on that front.
Okay, excellent. Turning to the Chamber of Commerce, the US Chamber of Commerce, Lauren, when you look at India and all these achievements, does the Chamber also think in terms of benchmarks, that one country, lessons learned, could be a good best practice for other countries that are under the focus of the Chamber of Commerce? I know this is a little bit outside taking India into another context, but or are you more kind of country by country and then see what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm part of the international division, specifically with the U.S.-India Business Council, but we have councils that focus across the whole globe. We also have the Global Energy Institute and several other institutions. And we all work together and we share best practices. We talk about the work that we're doing, take ideas from each other. So we're not working totally siloed.
No,
having these conversations.
Exactly. But is the Chamber also engaged in following the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals in the UN? Is that a part of your awareness towards the countries you're focusing on?
Absolutely. I mean, we pay attention to everything that's pertinent to the countries that we're focused on, right? So, for example, with India, I mean, it's a huge focus, right? Their climate goals, sustainability, resilience, lessening air pollution. So anything we're looking at when we're talking about energy in commercial sector with India, I mean, that's certainly a focus of the companies that we work with. So it's a focus of, you know, what we try to help build as well.
Yeah, excellent. And Sami, you mentioned Africa. Are there some are there some prospects for importing success stories from other countries to into maybe invigorating the situation in different regions, or how do you see this cross-fertilization aspect?
Before talking to Africa, since you mentioned the SDGs, just I thought of mentioning something that through our sustainability strategy, basically, we were trying to quantify the sustainability performance of the oil and gas industry, and you know, trying to link them to the SDGs, you know, the 17 SDGs. As a matter of fact, we're working with academia to help us to achieve that, and currently we're working with the University of Texas at Austin to develop a kind of correlations to somehow quantify the performance of the oil and gas industry, the social, the economical, as well as the environmental, and link it to the SDGs. And so hopefully within a year or two we'll see something coming out of that work, that collaborative work with the University of Texas at Austin.
Okay.
Going back to Africa, I think the way that I call Africa is basically the unexplored continent. You've mentioned in your introduction remarks that it's the fastest growing in terms of population. The forecast shows that the world will increase its population almost by 1.7 billion in the next 20 years. Half of that will come from Africa. So you're talking about almost 850 million people additional population in Africa, in a continent that is the highest in the energy poverty, and the lowest in the energy access, and the lowest in GDP as well. We look at and at the same time the highest in the population growth. So that puts a lot of emphasis on this great continent, and the way that we see it from a SPE perspective, I think it's we call it the unexplored continent, really, to be quite honest with you. And we try to put more focus on Africa. We had our board meeting early this year in Cairo, and we organized something we called African leadership. We're trying to promote the development of the young generations in Africa in the oil and gas in the oil and gas domain. And there are a lot of good stories really to be told in Africa. A country like Ghana, for example, that went through several oil and gas development, especially in the offshore, and the impact of the gas discovery in Ghana's economy. I think I read an article last year written by New York Times that showed that the Ghana economy is going to be the fastest growing economy globally in 2018. And it's basically due to the discoveries. The impact of discovering gas, producing gas on the Ghana's economy, even the climate itself, because when that gas will be put in a better use instead of burning trees, for cooking and for simple or liquid for power generation. So there are several examples that can be told, and we've seen lately several significant discoveries, especially offshore. We've seen new discoveries in Egypt, for example. We've seen several discoveries in the southwest coast of Africa. But the challenge here is most of it is deep water. Most of that discovery is deep water, which would require a lot of an investment, really, and that's something that I think we as an industry need to put more focus on. Africa has a lot of potential, really, and the good thing about it, the impact of anything that can be discovered is going to be huge, humongous. When it comes to the social life of the people, the economical life of the people, and most importantly, the climate itself, because it will replace very primary source of energy that is used. I have a picture. I wish that I can show it to you, that shows the Africa at night. It's a picture captured by NASA with a contrast with Europe. And you can see the huge contrast between Europe, which is lightning at night, and the Africa, which is dimmed, completely dimmed at night. So I think I see Africa as a new opportunity. I call it, and we call it, unexplored, yet to be explored and discovered when it comes to the hydrocarbon resources. Yeah. And the good thing about it, we're sharing the best practices, so they are not starting from scratch. And if you look at, there was a study that reported the carbon intensity of the oil and gas operation by country, that showed Ghana one of the best countries when it comes to the carbon intensity of the oil and gas, which means that the development is done using the best practices. Yeah. And that's something that we would like also to share through our conferences in SPE.
Very good, excellent. I think the context with a country actually doing major finds and be able to actually turn that into something positive is a intriguing concept. Councillor, I was in China, and they have finds there as well, but in oil and gas they're kind of more outward looking, and they have this Belt Road investment fund where they actually navigate into the Silk Road and Silkway to see if they can channel energy into the country and have huge investments there. Is India outrovert in the same fashion under your administration, or do you have any comments in that regard?
Certainly in the neighborhood we are doing many projects, you might be aware, and in the though in our solar and renewable the wind energy, particularly as we for solar cells we are trying to bring in the investment in huge from outside, but certainly when we talk about the oil and gas and the LNG front, the terminals which we are trying to build on the east coast of India, they are going to be helpful for the countries like Bangladesh, which are on our border. Similarly, we have some investments in Myanmar from which the LNG is getting produced. The ONGC or the overseas arm of that OVL. We have the assets in some plots in Africa. Even our companies have some investments in Eagle Ford Basin in USA. So we are there at across the globe in a way, and in discussions for the LNG import with the new companies. So we are trying to secure the future for the gas wherever possible, and then when it comes to helping others and neighbors and at the policy level or at the actual coordination and cooperation, India is trying to do its best with the available resources.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'd like to use that as the secure the future in that way as the final remark, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning on this topic. I thought we have covered a huge context here, and I thank you for your inputs and your energy. Okay, thank you. Right now? Yeah. me to give us a bit more insight into what SPE is doing. And in particular,
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is Samuel Naim. I'm very happy to be here with you in this great venue representing the Society of Petroleum Engineers. As Yasin mentioned, 2 weeks ago, SPE organized a historical event. We called it Gaia in Fontainebleau near Paris. And today I will try to share with you how Gaia event is linked to the energy security and access. In SPE, we realized a long time ago that due to the negative image of oil and gas, which I think you all share with me, mainly due to the climate challenge, might impact our capability to operate, but most importantly also it might impact our capability to attract young talent, which might impose some challenges when it comes to the energy access and security from the supply point of view in the long term. And that's why I think to address this challenge, SPE through our society's sustainability technical section, which represent more than 5,000 of our global members internationally, has thought about a way to address this challenge by introducing a program called Gaia. Basically, we're trying to introduce some new big ideas that the professional societies like SPE and others, and definitely IEA is welcome, are uniquely positioned to enable, and of course our stakeholders, including the industry, to action. And that is with an objective that could be fully aligned with the IEA gas oil technology initiative. Gaia is a name derived from planet Earth, allows us to, would allow us to act collectively, decisively, and urgently to address the challenges to our planet. We're doing this because we, as oil and gas industry, or representing the oil and gas industry as a society, would like to be looked at as part of the solution of the social as well as the climate challenges, rather than being presented today by many people as the cause of the social and climate challenges. So in the next few minutes, I will share with you what is Gaia, and basically, it's basically the objective of this is to provide the oil and gas industry with new actions to raise the scale urgency of the planet's sustainability challenges and performance, including economical, social, and environmental, by reinforcing existing best practices, promoting technology excellence, and introducing new radical ideas. And the concept is basically behind it is to mobilize oil and gas industry to a tipping point, basically integration of the SDGs. We talked about SDGs in attempt to quantify our performance as an oil and gas industry. We would like to claim the pride of what we do in supporting the global economy, enriching and enhancing its social development, but also we would like also to be held accountable when it comes to things like the climate challenge. So that's the one of the objectives. So what can we do together, basically and differently, is to mobilize oil and gas industry, plus of course the stakeholders, to a tipping point, to aggregate our efforts and impacts. Today, when you look at the impact of oil and gas, it's in isolation, in islands, basically. Today, it's all trees, if I may call, and no forests. So we would like really to quantify and collect the performance, the sustainability performance of our industry at large, and see the great impact and of course the accountability that I mentioned. Also, what we can do differently is the engagement itself, solution-oriented collective engagement model. We'd like to develop a new model of engagements for both internal and external, and get away of the blame. If you look at the last several decades, basically, we have been in the blame side of the equation. We would like to get away from the blame of the equation. And last but not least, through a collaborative model, through unprecedented collaboration level, aligned with the challenge itself and the scale and the urgency of the issues itself. So to do that, we put together an event, 2 days event, where 55 individuals representing all stakeholders. So we invited NOCs, IOCs, government officials, university students, financial institutions. IEA also was with us in this. In day one, we asked ourselves a big question: how can we ensure that oil and gas continue to be in the right side of the history? We believe that we are on the right side of the history, supporting the global economy, enriching and enhancing the social development, and protecting, trying to protect the environment. But the question is how to ensure that we will continue to be in the right side of the history. And the second day, we brainstormed a lot of ideas, and we came up with 6 pathways, basically to continue in the right, or to be in the right side of the history, focusing on the internal collaboration, the external collaboration, and that's why I am here today, listening and communicating, innovation, which is again addressing the technology excellence, measuring and what matters, and that's what I've mentioned earlier, measuring the performance for the pride as well as the accountability, and last but not least, the executing that strategy. So just unfortunately, I don't have enough time to detail the whole thing. I'll share with you several examples. Example of the collaboration amongst associations is basically, we collaborate with many organizations, including IEA, IOGP, IPCA, to put together strategies to basically communicate and commit to create a working platforms to address that issue, the sustainability issue. In the measuring, I mentioned it in my panel, we're working with academia to help us to quantify the sustainability. And again, when I say quantify, I'm not just talking about the pride, the positive side, but also the negative side, if there is a negative side. So we're working with the University of Texas at Austin, the University of Houston, and many academia to help us to measure the oil and gas sustainability performance. And in the execution, we have a lot really to talk about. And I can talk almost for a day about the execution, because it touches the technology, the pocket of excellence that we have today, and then that we basically adopt in SPE. We can talk a lot about decarbonization of oil and gas through technology. We can talk about availing more gas and power, and a good example is the shale boom impact in the U.S., for example, on the climate challenge. Availing more gas, for power generation in the U.S. resulted almost in drop of 28% of the CO2 emission in the U.S. in the last 3 years. 28%, that was reported by the IEA. So imagine if we can do this globally. We were talking about India today. Imagine we can do this in India. Replacing coal or other liquids in the power generation. The impact is going to be huge, humongous. Decreasing gas flaring, that's also something that we would like to focus a lot, because currently there are several countries flaring their associated gas. Unfortunately, so we would like to capture these opportunities, advance the technology to capture those, that gas and make better use of it. Increasing crude to chemicals is something that's new, that would make more uses, non-combusted uses of oil. that also will have a great impact on the climate. And as well as the economic, because that's an industry. It's going to be an industry by itself, almost similar to the petrochemicals industry we have today. So you're talking about creating jobs, and enhancing social life of people, generating new products out of oil that would enrich the lifestyle of people in all domains as well. Increasing carbon capture and sequestration, I think we talked a lot about it, decreasing carbon intensity of our operation, including the supply chain, increasing energy efficiency. IEA, I can always quote IEA in this by saying that focusing only in efficiency can reduce 40% of the CO2 emission. Can you imagine this? These are the pockets that I think we need to put more focus and more investment in. Increasing carbon conversion. It's something new. We can see now several startups around good universities like Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. With the new small startups, we would like to put more investment in those startups to scale up those small ideas to increase the carbon conversion. Increasing decarbonizations in the oil and gas supply chain is something that we intend to promote and invest in as well. So these are just few examples of what Gaia is all about. So it's engagements, it's execution, it's quantification, and most importantly, providing a platform for all partners, all stakeholders for better communication and conversations. Let me leave you with my thoughts. I don't know if there is a question and answer session after that. Again, oil and gas has been a key factor in supplying energy to in the past, in the present, and will be in the future. Today, I think the percentage is 53 of maybe 54% of the global mix coming from oil and gas. Most of the forecasts showing decrease in the percentage in the oil, but when you look at it from quantity point of view, it's increasing, and all of them are showing significant increase in the gas side. So oil and gas will be with us really for very, very long time. It will be major factor in the global energy mix, and the thing that we need to focus on more is how to make this cleaner and more efficient. The industry has achieved remarkable energy security and access outside the political domain with production replacements. And again, I mentioned outside of the political domain because we SPE has nothing to do with the geopolitics. So our focus is more professional and technical. So when you look at the performance of the industry in the last 20 years, for example, we did not only replace the high production, but also increased the reserves for both oil and gas with more than 50%. So if you look at the reserves figures 20 years ago and now, you see the oil and gas reserves almost 50 plus more. That's, of course, in addition to replacing what we have produced in the last 20 years. So you're talking about a lot of investments, a lot of developments that has been put together to achieve this goal. The industry has experienced unmatched development as well, even during the downturn. When the oil price dropped, and that's why we don't see any shortage in the demand now, in the supply. Sorry, because the industry has invested a lot in the development even during downturn, and these are all really good. Performance, coming from the industry. Natural gas is going to be significant. It is significant today, and it's going to be significant in the future, and it will continue for very, very long time. And I think I'm very happy to see it growing because, again, natural gas is being looked as a green source of energy, significantly reducing the CO2 emission. And the U.S. example, the one that I mentioned few minutes ago, is a good example of this. Sustainability, energy access and security will be a major factor in achieving the United Nations 17 social development goals. You look at, for example, the energy poverty goal out of the SDGs. the goal for the United Nations for that to be zero by 2030. You can imagine today we have more than 1 billion people in the world have no access to modern energy, source of energy. So and add to that, of course, the increase in population. So there will be a lot of effort really to achieve that United Nations Social Development Goal to reach zero energy poverty by 2030. And that's why I think energy access and security will play a major role. Oil and gas industry will lead the global energy security, access, and transition. And again, I've mentioned my definition of energy transition in the panel, and let me repeat it again. Our definition of the transition is more gas and renewables in the power generation, more crude into chemicals, non-combusted uses, and oil will continue playing a major role in the transportation, especially aviations and marine. That's basically the energy transition that we are working towards and would like to lead the world in achieving that. And SPE will partner with everybody basically to promote and see the sustainability concept implemented and the energy transition implemented in a more efficient and more clean way. We're putting a lot of hope on the Gaia to be the right platform really for people to collaborate, engage, communicate, and work together. And we're inviting IEA to join us in this. As I've mentioned, NOCs, IOCs, service companies, academia, as well as financial institutions were with us through that event, and they will continue with us. So the 6 pathways that I've mentioned earlier, there will be some groups and teams and committees that working on these 6 pathways, developing strategies to put the concept of the Gaia into action. I think that's all what I have for you. It's again, I think it's a remarkable event. We want we need to achieve 2 things. Number 1, to get out of the blame. Any
questions on the COP to Sami before we move ahead? We also had the opportunity to follow through that slightly behind schedule. So I suggest maybe that that's good. Lunch, and then I'd like to leave the floor to the next moderator that is going to guide us through Melanie to the next session. So the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much, and I will introduce our distinguished panelists here in just a second. I would say first off that I don't know about you all, I have noticed there's been a noticeable shift in attitudes and thinking about climate change in the last year, not in our government, but certainly in the oil and gas industry, certainly in the population. Looking at the United States, I think the poll I heard most recently was 70% of Americans think that climate change is a serious problem, and which I think that's a big change. The people that that is reflected in what businesses are doing. I think I would not attribute a lot of that to the Green New Deal, although that has raised consciousness about the issue. I think it has a lot more to do with the weather. People are starting to see the hurricanes, the impacts, severe weather, et cetera, et cetera. I got back from Scotland day before yesterday. I never thought I would find myself saying, God, the weather is so much better in Scotland than it is here. And it is the weather today. I've never seen a storm driving into work like I saw today. So I think the weather is and the horrible hurricanes that we've had recently, the fires in California, are starting to point us in a direction where we really need to address climate change. That surely has not gone unnoticed in the investment community or in the oil and gas industry. That's what we're here to talk about today. As the oil and gas sector becomes a larger part of the alternative energy landscape, we're going to talk about what investment trends are emerging, what strategies are having more or less success, what's the role of the traditional hydrocarbon producer in the alternative energy space. Should there be a greater focus on investment in the technologies needed to reduce emissions and increase efficiency in existing or planned oil and gas projects as well? So there's a whole range of topics that we are going to discuss. What I thought I would do, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to put up a few framing slides because I can't speak without slides, and then ask each of our panelists to talk for 5 minutes or so about their thoughts on the topics at hand. Let me first introduce Steinar Akars. He is heading up the low carbon solutions in Equinor, responsible for carbon capture and storage and hydrogen solutions. He has worked with Equinor, formerly Statoil, for 25 years and has held senior positions within the international business development community. Todd Glass is a partner in energy infrastructure for Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. He leads a market-leading energy and infrastructure practice focused on the representation of energy companies, project developers, and investors in the energy sector in North America, Asia, and Europe. So those are our panelists. My name is Melanie Kinderdine. I didn't introduce myself. I am a principal at the Energy Futures Initiative. I work with Secretary Moniz. He's another one of 3 principals. Joe Heiser is our third. Natalie is one of our analysts and communications people. And we spend, Energy Futures Initiative does unbiased policy technology analysis in a carbon-constrained world, and we are totally focused on climate change. So let me, okay, now I have to go look at these, because they're animated. These are overarching trends that we see in affecting energy systems. This is U.S. focused. I think they're generally true. Changes in our supply profile, that's not generally true. The previous speaker talked about unconventional oil and gas. Shift from resource to technology-based energy systems, that's really your intermittent renewables. And the digitalization of management of that, we see as that shift is critical. In general, digitalization, big data analytics and smart systems, electrification, electricity dependence, demographics, urbanization, emergence of smart cities. 2007, for the first time in the history of the world, there are more people living in urban areas than rural areas. And we're going to add 10 cities of 10 million people or more by 2030 in the world. Decarbonization of the electricity sector, and that's due to flat demand and changing fuel mix. And that says our boundary creates enormous boundary conditions, which I'm sure Steinar has to deal with every day. Energy industry, multi-trillion-dollar per year, highly capitalized commodity business, exquisite supply chains. That's a physicist word. You might guess who the physicist is. It means complex supply chains. That's a Secretary Moniz word. Established customer bases, providing essential services at all levels of society. This leads to a system with considerable inertia, aversion to risk, extensive regulation, and complex politics. I went through last night after I got back from Scotland and looked at IEA's most recent global energy investment. Power sector, I think for the 3rd year in a row, you've seen more investment in electricity than in oil and gas, both upstream and downstream. And these are in billions of dollars. You've got here your approximately 770 billion. This is just me looking at the bars, okay? In electricity and power systems, down a little bit since last year. 720 billion in oil and gas, up a little bit since last year. I'm going to fall off the stage. Efficiency, 230 billion, and 80 billion in coal supply. That's up 2%. That was surprising to me, but at any rate, 15 billion in renewables for transport and heat, and that's down. Approximately 300 billion is in the electricity sector is in renewables, 110 billion in fossil fuel power. So the world is investing in renewables, and 3 times as much basically in renewables. This is later stage private investment in sustainable technologies by region or country. Let me just say very quickly, Japan's down, US down, Europe up, China down, rest of the world down. So EU is the only one where the trends are up in sustainable technologies, and a large drop-off in China between 2015 and 2016. New players in the energy space. When I mentioned digitalization, we looked at 5 areas: building energy management, energy data analytics, global drones, and smart cities. 6 areas: energy and cybersecurity. I dare say, and I looked at the companies that are very focused in these areas. When I go to an American Petroleum Institute meeting, these companies are not there. When you go to your Energy Trade Association meetings, these companies are not there. They're not experts in energy. Energy companies are not necessarily experts in what they do, and I think we need to start thinking about that cross-pollination. Okay, what you're seeing here, I'm going to switch very rapidly. This is relevant to what we're going to be talking about here. This is everyday wind and solar generation, actual data in the state of California. Blue is wind, red is solar. And what you see coming up here, and timed it perfectly, is 90 days in California in 1 year with no wind, little to no wind. And what you see here also, 10 days with little to no wind, 10 days in a row, 7 days in a row, 9 days in a row, et cetera, et cetera. Battery storage technologies are generally speaking 4 hours. Okay, what you also have in California, and these will vary based on the location, what you also have in California is significant seasonal variation. Both wind and solar peak in the summer, not surprisingly, trough in the winter. The delta between those two is 3.1 terawatt hours between generation in the summer and generation in the winter. Battery storage will not manage this problem. Right now it's 4 hours. It's basically for ancillary services. The message is you need fuel, and I think that the speakers are going to, the panelists will talk about that as well. This is from the California study that we did as well. And we looked at 33 different technology categories. These are greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential. We did not change their policies. We operated within California's policy constraints, 40%, 60% renewables by 2030, et cetera, et cetera. What technologies did you need between now and 2030, and what are the emissions reductions that you could get from those technologies? Electricity, transportation, industry, buildings, and agriculture by sector. Electricity, by far, 17.7 million metric tons of CO2 from NGCCs with CCUS. Those are specific plants. I think there are 7 or 8 plants we looked at. That's what you get. Transportation, by far the biggest emissions reduction potential is from efficiency, CAFE standards. Electric vehicles do not get you. You get 22 metric tons CO2e reductions. Electrification gets you 9. So just going through those. So just pointing this out. And one thing, and I'd love for our panelists to think about this as well. We looked at how we might repurpose existing carbon-focused infrastructure and use that infrastructure for an alternative energy future. Hydrogen obviously figures very heavily into that. You've got here, we did biofuels, hydrogen, fuel or feedstock, and negative emissions technologies. The oil and gas industry, huge expertise in subsurface, okay, where if you're going to do CCUS, you need that. I think that delivering energy at scale to the world, which is what oil and gas companies have been doing for many years, is a highly undervalued asset that we need for the future, and the expertise, et cetera, in all of these. So those are just a few thoughts to kind of frame what we're going to be talking about here, and let's start with Steinar, if you want to say a few words.
Yes.
You've got slides too. Great, thanks.
Thank you, Melanie, for that excellent framing. So I'm heading up low carbon solutions in Equinor. We are the second largest provider of natural gas to Europe, and most of what I will be talking about is focused on Europe. And just to give you some context, Europe is really making an effort in delivering on the emission targets. So, for instance, UK just passed a law to become carbon neutral in 2050. They have also decided to ban new houses from connecting to the gas grid in 2025. So it's a really strong effort in Europe towards becoming carbon neutral. But carbon neutrality doesn't mean to get rid of hydrocarbons. It just means that we need to manage the CO2 emissions from them. And that's basically what our CCS projects are all about. So I will touch upon four of them. It's what we call the Northern Lights. It's a CCS project based on industry, post-combustion. Then we have several pre-combustion CCS projects, which basically are hydrogen, producing hydrogen from natural gas with capturing the CO2 and then storing it permanently. It's about hydrogen to heat with huge seasonal swings. It's hydrogen to power, which basically can deliver power when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine. And then we have a zero carbon negative project that we also have just launched. So I will start with the Northern Lights project. That's a partnership between Equinor and Shell and Total. And this is about capturing CO2 from two industrial sites on the east part of Norway. It's cement and it's waste management. And then we transport the CO2 liquefied on ship to a location on the west coast where it is temporarily stored and then injected permanently into offshore storage formations. This is a very innovative project because it's the first time in the world that we capture CO2 in one location and then store it in another. And this project initially will transport 1 million tons of CO2 per year, but we designed this for 5 million tons. So this is designed for much more than the initial two capture plants. And basically, because we are able to transport CO2 on ship, we can collect CO2 from any harbor in Europe. So any industrial site which wants to capture the CO2 now will have a solution to get rid of it. So where are we? Well, we have been awarded a license for the storage permit. We will drill a confirmation well this autumn. And next year, we will take the final investment decision. And then we will be operational in 2023. As I said, this will not be a success unless we capture more business, and we are now in dialogue with 15 companies in 8 different countries to kind of bring more business into this. It's a very strong interest from industry in Europe to connect to this. And then I will move towards the hydrogen projects that we are working on. First one is what we call H21, north of England. And the context here is that in the UK, they use a lot of natural gas to heat their homes and to cook their food. Actually so much that there are 4 times as much energy that flows in the gas grid compared to the electricity grid. They need to solve these these emissions by 2050 if they're going to be carbon neutral. And if they're going to do this by electrifying, it's going to mean a lot of reinforcement of the electrical grid. So what we are proposing here is to use or repurpose the existing natural gas grid, use the low pressure gas grid to carry clean hydrogen instead of natural gas. And then we will upstream produce large amounts of clean hydrogen based on natural gas, collect the CO2 and send the CO2 to permanent storage. This is a concept which will cover 1/7 of the UK. It has a capacity of 12 gigawatt of hydrogen production, and it also has storage capacity of 8 terawatt hours to manage the seasonal swings between the high demand in the winter and the low demand in the summer. It's a feasibility study showing what it takes and what it will cost. And in terms of the attractiveness of this concept, it's basically that it provides optionality for the users. Today, they use natural gas instead of electricity because natural gas is much cheaper. But unfortunately, natural gas has a very high CO2 footprint, which is not consistent with the carbon neutrality in 2050. As you can see here, the concept of transforming gas to hydrogen with CCS will increase the cost compared to gas with 50%, but it's still far cheaper than electricity. And as you also can see, the CO2 footprint from the hydrogen solution is very attractive. So it creates optionality. It's a cost-efficient way to deal with this, carbon neutrality in 2050. And where are we now? We have delivered a feasibility report late last year, and we will have to move into a feed phase to detail the numbers even further. In parallel, there's a lot of ongoing what we call safety evidence, basically demonstrating that this solution is just as safe as the one they have today based on natural gas. If that work does not conclude positively, I'm afraid that this solution will not be introduced because it's very hard to see a new solution, energy solution being introduced without at least matching the safety case that we have today. So if policy also comes in place, basically making sure that the extra costs are distributed and creates a commercial case here, we believe that we can take a final investment decision in 2023, and then this will be operational in 2028. And as I said, this will cover 1/7 of the UK. Another project that we're working on is hydrogen to power, and that's something we do together with Vattenfall and GasUni in Holland. And also here, we utilize an existing infrastructure. There is an existing gas power plant, which we look at repurposing to burn clean hydrogen instead of natural gas. We will reform the gas to hydrogen, collect the CO2, send the CO2 on ships, the same ships as I showed previously, and store the CO2 permanently on the ground. We also here have hydrogen storage, and that is to enable the hydrogen reformer to run baseload, but the power plant to go up and down and only produce power when the wind does not blow. We believe that when the wind blows and when the sun shines, electricity should come from renewable sources. This is an excellent backup and very complementary, giving clean backup when the wind doesn't blow. And finally, the latest project that we have launched is a collaboration with National Grid Ventures and Drax. And that is to see if we can capture organic CO2. So Drax is currently burning organic wood in what was previously coal-fired power plants. So they now burn organic bio. So the CO2 that they emit is carbon neutral. So we will look at capturing that CO2 and store it permanently to create negative emissions, which then can be offset against kind of positive CO2 emissions from hydrocarbon. We will also look into mixing organic CO2 with clean hydrogen to produce artificial fuels, for instance, towards the aviation sector. So it's still an early phase project, but we believe that we can build demonstration units here, which will become operational in 2026, 2027. that's basically what I had. So you can take Q&As later.
Are you going to take?
Yeah, I'll do it right.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll do
Wherever
it right
you
here,
want.
if that's all right. I don't have slides. Melanie, your slides are terrific. Yours are good too, don't get me wrong, but hers are really stellar. Todd Glass, great to be here. Just one quick sentence. We're a Silicon Valley-based law firm. We consider ourselves to be among the leading folks developing energy technologies, advancing the financing of those technologies and the business models, and launching them through project finance, asset finance, and all variety of money behind them. So it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about it. As part of my opening remarks, I wanted to talk about what's going on in the energy industry. I've been practicing for more than 25 years, and as most of the people in this room have been doing it for a while, you'd notice that the energy industry is going through a significant transformation. First and foremost, there's new lower cost renewable energy now on the grid. Wind energy is now selling in the United States for less than $20 a megawatt hour, and there's PPAs for solar projects that are now being executed for less than $30 a megawatt hour, approaching 20 itself. Energy storage is starting its way down the cost curve. We're not there yet, but when I started doing solar projects in 2005, the price was 6 to 7 times what we're negotiating and cutting contracts for now. If we can get down the same cost curve again with energy storage, both batteries and non-battery energy storage, we'll be looking at quite a significant transformation. The marginal cost of energy in the United States and in other places, because of these renewables, are starting to approach zero. That's an important thing to realize. The energy systems that, especially in the electric power systems, but throughout the industry, has been faced with a marginal pricing systems in which you look at the cost of energy, at the time that it's generated versus the capital cost. Well, renewables have very little actual costs at the time of production, a marginal cost, and in some places in the United States you actually have negative pricing, less than zero, which is really throwing the markets for a loop. As a result of these functions, as Melanie's paper shows, old coal, old nuclear, inefficient natural gas plants are being retired at a remarkable rate. Digitalization, as Melanie was talking about, is starting to affect the grid, enabling energy efficiency and demand response and greater control and dispatch of distributed energy resources. Cybersecurity, that Sammy was mentioning before, is also becoming a huge issue because we're seeing new risks for an old system that has been digitally transformed. Investors, some of the stakeholders are pushing on the system to transform it. ESG measures, as a number of people have talked about. I would submit that PG&E, which is the largest utility in the state of California, has just gone into bankruptcy earlier this year. It's probably the very first climate change related bankruptcy in the U.S. electric industry that you've seen. They went into bankruptcy because of wildfires that was caused due to climate and change. Very significant, and it's causing people who invest money, who don't necessarily care about the environment, to care about the risks that the companies that they invest in are facing. C&I customer, commercial industrial customers from technologies throughout the industry want to be green. They want to save green as well, and they see the ability to lock into lower cost renewables as a means by which to control costs and to satisfy things. We're seeing some quirky virtual power purchase agreements and some other mechanisms that are doing it because they're not given the choice by their local utility. So you're seeing a result, new business models that are being created, and at the bottom line, new competition where there was not competition is arising in the energy system. And now, while you could say that everything I just said is about the U.S., you will see in Europe and in Australia
as well as in parts of Asia as well, you're starting to see this transformation hitting all of the factors that I just said, affecting them as well. So this presents a set of opportunities to invest capital and to launch innovative technologies and business models. The monopolies that have been in place for decades have been slow to evolve and adapt. And by this I'll mean vertically integrated monopolies in the electric sector, for instance. I'm just pointing them out because they've been very slow actually to react to this, and they've been very cozy with their symbiotic relationships with their state regulators and the like. They are now facing competition from these technology and business models that never have before. If you look at who's providing the capital into these things, the mainline venture capital firms up and down Sand Hill Road and around the world, in London and Boston, you name it, they're not adept at investing in this sector. It's too capital intensive, it's too slow, and it's just, they don't have the stomach to invest in this type of a development cycle. So therefore, where is the money coming from? Well, the strategics are filling the void, and this is where I'm starting to get into why the oil and natural gas sector means so much to this energy transformation. Energy Impact Partners is an innovative group of U.S. and U.S. and European utilities investing in what's next in energy. European-based energy concerns, such as the National Grid, formed National Grid Ventures, which Equinor, I think, is working with on a few things. Centrica, Engie, you name it. Asian technology players are also getting in, as well as ESG-related private equity funds and hedge funds and the like are invested in this space. Not to be left out, the NOCs and the IOCs are similarly situated to be able to seize these opportunities. I would say that the oil and natural gas industry is uniquely positioned to be able to help in this because they, more than any other industry in the world, embrace long-term planning and embrace long-term financial capital investment cycles. They look 20, 30 years down the line and they do it. The second thing they have is they have a lot of capital, which is also a good thing. They're well positioned to shape these ESG types of investments as well, the low carbon. They're facing stakeholder, not just lawsuits and the like, but the oil and natural gas industry is being pushed by their investors to start looking to broaden the way in which they are engaged in the energy complex. Another factor that I would say the oil and natural gas sector is uniquely qualified to invest in this because of their understanding of complex distribution networks throughout the world, not just within a localized economy, but on an international basis. And there's very few other industries that have that basis and those capabilities in-house. A few more things. They have the oil and natural gas industry, I think, is unlike the electric industry, is actually prepared to compete. They're comfortable with competition both on a local basis and an international basis. Something that and I'll just throw the U.S. vertically integrated utilities under the bus because I don't see them here anyway, but I mean, they have been not really good at figuring out how to compete. They have been trying to defeat competition rather than embracing it. And I would say the oil and natural gas industry has always embraced competition. They might have some market power here and there, but they've been able to embrace it and they like to compete. And finally, two more things. One is they're uniquely qualified to look at the security and the cybersecurity aspects of their systems, as I think that Sammy was mentioning, has been mentioned. That's something that's also unique. And then finally, I would say, as was stated before by Steiner, that the oil and natural gas industry has a unique understanding of carbon-based systems, the economies and the infrastructures around them. So finally, I would just say that there are a bunch of NOCs and IOCs in particular. I'll mention a few. BP Ventures has been investing in things like free-wire technologies and Fulcrum Bioenergy. You've got Chevron and ChargePoint, which is EV charging structure. And and Shell, you name it. Equinor is invested in Scatec as well as Converge and the like. And we represented Total in buying 66% of SunPower, which is perhaps the largest and most significant solar company in the United States. Few people know that Total actually owns 66% of that company and is investing in that thing. So with this, I would say I'm excited to be here, and Melanie is all over for you for some good hardball questions.
No, I'm throwing out the softballs. Thank you. Because you all have already answered them. Steiner, I was impressed with your schematic of your CCS and the ship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And looks very interesting. I believe that CCS is essential because this is a global problem. We're shutting our coal plants down in the U.S., not in Southeast Asia. And but I'm wondering about the scale of that enterprise, the scale of a carbon capture and sequestration enterprise. And I keep hearing it's as large as the global oil enterprise. Can you share some thoughts on that, and also the regulatory structure that you might contemplate for something like that?
So we have been storing 1 million tons of CO2 for the last 20 years each year. And this first project that we are now maturing with the ship that you referred to is about the same size. But we designed it for 5, so it has room to grow with kind of the pipeline capacity and so on. And the project I talked about in the UK, decarbonizing heat, is close to 20 million tons. But we need even more than that to fully decarbonize the European energy economy. But it's really important to get started, and these projects will be billion-dollar investments, and it will be required. It's a really challenge. I think the biggest challenge is really on the regulatory and the financing part, because from a technology perspective, this has been done for, as I said, 20 years or even more. It's not rocket science, really. But the problem is currently it's basically not expensive enough to emit the CO2. So we need to find business models where we can justify the cost of capturing and storing the CO2. And then these projects are really key. We need to make them big enough to get some economy of scale, but not too big so that they will kind of choke the entire effort in terms of funding it. So we believe we are on track. What we see is that we have governments in Norway, in UK, in Netherlands, and Germany also, which are forward-leaning and willing to basically fund a major proportion of the first projects. And then they are expecting the market to take care of it later. But it will require regulation for the first projects to get it started.
Actually, Melanie, can I jump
Sure,
on that question?
whenever you all want it, yeah.
Thank you. The U.S. energy system is sort of unique. Unlike Europe, where there might be regulation that would drive this, actually the most significant energy legislation in the last 2 years has actually come in the creation of energy tax credits for CCUS and
45Q.
45Q, exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
It's really quite significant, and I think the Atlantic Council is working with a number of companies on investigating what this can be done. In essence, the same tax structures, tax credits that gave rise to this wonderful cost curve for renewables, for wind and solar, is now being applied and made an opportunity for CCUS. 45Q gives tax credits for CO2 and carbon that is actually sequestered or otherwise used along the lines of what you're talking about. So the exact same structures in the banks and the investors that invest tax equity to basically soak up tax credits to avoid paying federal taxes in the United States. So those same structures are gradually being steered towards CCUS. So I have a feeling that it's just another means by which, and it by no means is necessarily rational, but tax policy is how we do things in the United States sometimes, and I think that it could be another means by which we could get there.
If I could take off my moderator's hat for a minute and say on that there are no rules that have been issued
Correct.
for taking advantage of the 45Q tax credit, which I think is incredible. The Congress put a value on carbon, okay, which is the first time that I've seen that. And 2024, I believe, is the deadline for projects to start. And there's no regulatory, generally speaking, we lack regulatory framework. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Correct.
And love to work with all of you on that.
I would just do the advertisement that the oil and gas industry should be paying attention to
paying
the
a lot of
upcoming
attention.
45Q.
Yep, yep.
The IRS is actually doing rulemaking on that right now.
Yep. The Todd on in January 2018, the Trump administration levied a 30% tariff on solar imports to the U.S. It covers imported solar cells and solar panels, solar modules, and it will last for 4 years. Also, the investment tax credit for solar expires in 2022. How do these things factor into your investment decision making?
Well, interestingly, Melanie, when you had up the slides and you were comparing 2017 versus 2018, I would say that those tariffs probably were what took us down that year. There was a significant downshift in the amount of capital that was put in to solar and wind in the United States, and in particular solar. Those solar panel module tariffs that hit probably took 18 to 20,000 employees out of the solar industry in the United States during that year because of tariffs. So yes, it has a very negative effect on that. And I would say even more importantly, the uncertainty of what's going on now is even worse. I know one executive from one solar company that moved, that over time, in order to get away from tariffs, moved their manufacturing to Mexico. And then they were told that we were going to be levying tariffs on everything imported from Mexico. So that type of uncertainty is definitely not helping capital move into the space, whether it be tax equity. It did increase costs and has increased costs on the cost of renewable energy. No doubt about it.
Thank you. Steinar, you talked about hydrogen and was curious about the infrastructure needs for a hydrogen economy, which is by and large what you described: power generation, buildings. We had a big push for hydrogen vehicles in the early 2000s, and I think that kind of fouled the water on hydrogen for a while because I remember the big headline in one of the papers: "Hydrogen highway goes bust in California." And so, but how can you repurpose some existing infrastructure? How long will it take, and at what expense, to develop an infrastructure to support hydrogen? Which I kind of look at hydrogen as the gas of 2050. So.
No, that's a very good question. I think your vision is very correct or good. But for us, it's really important to look at how the energy system works, and basically electricity is a very effective way and also can be produced in a clean way. So those sectors that can electrify should do it, and electric cars is a very good example. We basically don't need hydrogen cars because the electric cars are so superior. Maybe we need hydrogen trucks for a while until the battery technology keeps up. So where we need hydrogen is for those sectors where the electricity or electrons cannot manage, and that's the heavy sectors. So it's heavy industry, it's the seasonal variations of the heat sector, and power generation when the wind doesn't blow. So basically energy storage. That's why we need molecules, and molecules can be made clean with hydrogen, which doesn't have any CO2 footprint when it is used. So we just need to make sure that we produce hydrogen in a clean way. So what we have focused on is not hydrogen cars, but it is the heavy sectors. We look at the heating system where we verify that we can repurpose the network. So basically the plastic pipelines, millions of kilometers with plastic pipelines in the UK, which can be repurposed to carry hydrogen instead of natural gas. It's a huge saving from an asset perspective. Same with gas-fired power plants, small adjustments to make them burn hydrogen instead of gas. And then you have a very clean, flexible solution within the power sector. So those are the sectors that we focus on. And basically what we see is that hydrogen can solve the same issues as natural gas does today, more or less. So where we can use natural gas, you basically have a pathway which is consistent with a zero carbon future by switching to hydrogen.
I'm going to ask Todd one more question and then open it. Is this over at noon, the panel at noon? What time? 12:15. Okay, then I'll ask you a couple more questions. Todd, you mentioned demand response and talked about the monopoly utilities and resistance, electric utilities and resistance to change, et cetera, et cetera. And I have mixed feelings about that. Utilities are granted monopoly territories. They were for a reason. I actually think the reason for that is increasing as every sector of our economy becomes highly, highly dependent on electricity. And we looked at all of the Department of Homeland Security's critical lifeline networks. They are all dependent on electricity. And cybersecurity is an issue, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure if you could say more about how, in that context, competition works. I would say one other and demand response is a problem because the utilities can't see what's going on. They have visibility issues. But in a world and society and economies that are entirely dependent on electricity, should we deregulate them and rely on community aggregators, for example, to provide us with the electricity? And I would say one other thing, and just love your response. I was a reviewer of a community aggregation analysis for a state, and they looked at 5 examples. Every example, every community aggregator, and all the examples where there was successful aggregation had a provider of last resort. And it seems like to me that everything depends on electricity. Provider of last resort, the value of that goes up enormously. What would you do? What would you, as an investor?
Okay. First thing, I completely agree with the fact that our economy is becoming even more and more dependent upon electric power. As I tell my son, who's a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon, electrical computer engineer, every electron that goes into here came from somewhere else that your dad helped do, So it's one of those old man type of a thing. So I completely agree. And I am not one of the guys who wants to cut all the wires or even develop that type of thing. On the other hand, you talk about visibility. I think when somebody's eyes are closed purposely and they're not looking to electrify and digitize the grid, you can't blame them, or you need to blame them for being blind in some ways. I think ultimately when it comes to utilities, I think their best and highest function is to operate the grid, and to operate the grid safely and reliably in a secure way. Where I would focus deregulation is the creation of the energy to introduce more and more. You listen to some of the CCAs, the community choice aggregators in California, that are starting to sound a lot like monopolies. They say, we don't want any competition here. Ultimately, the answer is more and more and more types of generation, independent generators, providing services. Of course, you're going to need a provider of last resort as well, but I think ultimately we need to open up the system to competition. and where it's cost efficient to put, like Hawaii is doing, solar and an energy battery storage system on homes and to not allow export, that makes sense to me. In places where you don't have that type of sun, maybe community solar makes sense, you know, or other types of things. Absolutely agree, but I think ultimately the answer is in having more and more so that we're not reliant on any one particular source of generation or producer or anybody else.
Let me ask a question for both of you, and we have, I spoke at Atlantic Council 3 or 4 weeks ago on this as well, and we've been looking at critical metals and minerals for wind, solar, and batteries. World Bank did a study of it in late 2017, identified 21 categories of metals, minerals, or processes like aluminum smelting, and where those were taking place in the world, who had the metals, who had the minerals, who had the processes. Europe was highly problematic in that regard. The U.S. somewhat, and the bulk of the metals, minerals, and processes that we need for wind, solar, and batteries are some in South America, some in Africa, but largely in China and Australia. Should we be protecting those supply chains? Are you investing in those supply chains? Are you worried about the supply chains? And are we creating potential monopoly opportunities like we had with oil and OPEC, where there were 15 countries when OPEC was originally founded. 6 or 7 countries are mining or processing lithium. 1 or 2 are doing cobalt right now. So just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that, and I think focus on the supply chains is a very critical and important piece here, because it's not only about the resources and maybe the lack of resources that will be required. If you look at this, for instance, being solved by batteries, which is utopia, it's a huge amount of resources needed, and it's going to be a challenge to explore them. But it's not only that, it's also the supply industry. So if you look at, for instance, the amount of energy storage that you would need, and we have looked at Europe, so take that example. If you're going to solve this with the solutions that we promote by converting natural gas to hydrogen and then storing the hydrogen, it's basically the same type of solution that you see within methanol and ammonia fertilizer production. And there is a global supply chain already available that can deliver at the scale which is required to decarbonize the entire Europe and maybe more. So that's important because that piece is totally lacking if you're going to solve this by going electric. So to look at that supply chain is a very critical component.
Well, I think that's a great answer. The only thing I would add is one of the ways that you get around a cartel is not being as reliant on it over time. Along the lines of what was discussed earlier this morning with the U.S., LNG import versus export. The one thing I would say is that I think it's very important to be continuing to invest in the new technologies so that we're not just purely dependent upon a particular chemistry for our industry. I think that within energy storage, new battery compositions, as well as other types of energy storage, even some older types of energy storage, such as pumped hydro and compressed air energy storage, you name it. There's no one single solution. We don't want to be dependent upon a single solution. We need a diversity of solutions. Some are going to win in certain locations, some won't, but we need to be forging ahead on all of those things. And if, as we discussed earlier, getting to 2030, our goals in 2030, 2040, 2050 are going to require a wide variety of solutions. So in some ways, it is, as you say, we have to be focused on the supply chain and the sources, but we also have to be constantly thinking about what's next.
I would add on that global supply chains is something that the oil and gas industry knows
Yes.
a lot about, actually. So one last question, Steinar. What does Equinor look like in 2035? What kind of a company is it?
Well, we are clearly, we have a vision to what we call shape the future of energy, moving away. So the reason why we changed our name is purely because we want to be an energy company and not an oil and gas company. Of course, oil and gas will be a major part of our business even in 2035. But as I said, to decarbonize the economy is not about excluding hydrocarbons. It's about managing the emissions from the hydrocarbons. So it is about using hydrocarbons effectively and then managing the CO2 as a result of it, and use our competence in storing them permanently for millions of years. It's the same technology as when we produce oil and gas. Look for those reservoirs that can capture these molecules, but just to store them instead of exploring it. So, yeah, I think we will still be a lot of oil and gas, but with a very clear carbon focus.
Great, thank you. And Todd, one last question. Are there any alternative energy sources or technologies you think we are missing, or things that we're overvaluing or undervaluing from an investment perspective?
Well, there are some really interesting companies and some really interesting technologies out there. Even fusion companies that are still out there, small modular nuclear reactors, you name it. We need to be investing in doing research and then commercializing all of those type of technologies. I would say that to sort of combine these two questions together is that I don't see the oil and gas, hydrocarbons and hydrogen, we'll put those two together, being excluded from the system anytime soon. It's going to take too long to transition to other types of sources, and I think that there is a long-term need for those over the next 20 some years. But we do need to be looking to the new types of chemistries, the new types of technologies, the new business models as well. And if we get back to the earliest panel today, in some ways you can interpret everything I've been saying as being very focused on Europe or the US, but if you look at electrifying parts of Africa and whatnot, there's no reason why they need to go through the same process we went through to get to where we are. They should take the best practices and they should leapfrog over us into the distributed grids and things of that nature as they electrify and as they use more energy. So to my mind, we don't even know necessarily all the business models and technologies that need to be invested in, but I would encourage the oil and natural gas industry to be helping us to create that future.
Great, thank you. I would like to open this up to the audience. Are there any questions that anyone in the audience has of the panel? Yes, sir.
Hi, Alex Dewar with the Boston Consulting Group. I just was curious to get your views on the sustainability of the current financing model for renewables. I mean, incredibly capital intensive, as you point out, zero marginal cost in many instances, but it requires the capital up front, tremendous amounts of capital to build the infrastructure, both the generation, transmission, distribution, et cetera. And the boom we've seen in the last decade or so has really come in a period of unprecedentedly low interest rates. And so that's enabling investors to accept sort of 6% or less IRRs on some of these projects, especially with all the crowding in of finance around ESG investing and mobilizing around that. But you could look at any of those factors and say something changes and that can really shift the balance and the dynamic could swing going forward. So just curious to get your views on the model that's developed around financing renewables so far, how that looks going forward, and any risks to that.
Sure, happy to. A few observations. The first one is that I do think, as I mentioned before, promoting a particular type of diversification of the electric industry through the tax code is not something that I think is in the long term sustainable. So I think that if we could eventually trend towards a non-subsidization of any one particular sector, and the subsidies right now are everywhere. So if we could get to that, that would probably be more sane. The second thing I would say is, yes, the capital has been relatively easy, and the IRRs have been relatively low, and because of it. I do think that people like asset financing. Asset type project financing is something that is attractive, and it does provide very solid returns. The one caution I would say is that we have to figure out energy and capacity markets and some of the other markets that there is among the energy electric power industry and the oil and natural gas industry. Definitely understand this to the extent they're paying attention to Texas and other places. There needs to have a proper value put on the capacity, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we need people to build electric plant, and if they're to generation plant and transmission for that matter as well, and to build the grid. And if there's not a sufficient return for doing so, they won't do it. I completely agree with that. I think we need to, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is working towards trying to figure this out. I don't think that there is a solution, but we do need to look at the ERCOT Texas markets and what's going on in other places, and come up with, and I know, Melanie, this is one of the things you're thinking deep thoughts about. We need to come up with a predictable means by which we compensate people for investing in new plant.
Go ahead.
Now, if I may just add, not from a renewable, but from a low carbon perspective, the business models. These kind of clean solutions will be more expensive than the current ones. So there will be a need for aid in the beginning. But I believe over time, this can be like a pull from the market perspective. Basically, that the products, that is the end product here, will be more valuable and sold at a premium. And for instance, if we produce clean steel by using clean hydrogen instead of coal, which is currently used, there have been done calculations resulting in that the cost of a car will be $500 more expensive. And that's probably manageable. The same with cement. For instance, this project that we are working on in Norway will produce clean cement without a CO2 footprint. If that cement can be sold at a premium, then of course this business model will start to work. But we need to get started and get these products launched before we can see if that kind of solution can work.
I was just going to say that, I mean, Todd and I talked earlier, capacity markets are an issue. And I worked at the Department of Energy for 8 years of the Clinton administration, and restructuring was the big deal at DOE in the late 90s, and a whole lot of things have changed since the late 90s in power markets, in energy markets in general, et cetera, and I think I can't believe I'm going to say this, it's time to revisit that. We need to go back and look at it again, so to update these things. So, another question?
Hi, Patricia Lawyer from the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. So you talked a lot about 45Q. What are your thoughts on California's low carbon fuel standard and the CCS protocol? I mean, I think for hydrogen it could be a game changer. We've got some input from CARB that energy decarbonized before the meter could be used in the calculation. So I think they're doing a lot of different pathways to allow decarbonization of transportation. So just your thoughts.
Well, I'm excited about the potential, but we're in the early days yet. And I think that this is one of the places where we need input. I think California is once again leading the United States in a variety of ways, and this is one of them. I actually, if I could compare and contrast, I think 45Q, if we could actually get 45Q to work like the solar ITC or the wind PTC, we're talking tax credits here, that could really juice us. I look at where the California is going with more of a regulatory and more looking at how you could create value in doing it, but I think the two together could be quite complementary. But it's early days yet, and I'm very encouraged with the conversations that are going on, but it's going to take a little while, I think, to get there.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank our panelists, and it's been a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you all for joining us this morning. Please stay for lunch, and we hope you come back tomorrow morning. Same time. I promise you won't get rained on tomorrow morning. It's going to be a beautiful sunny day, and we'll be focused on the renewable hydrocarbon nexus tomorrow. So see you tomorrow. Thanks so much.